We're so excited today to have with us General Robert Spaulding, United States Air Force retired. He's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, regular on the John Fredericks Show. He's no nonsense, and he's been focusing for a long time on U.S.-China relations, economic and national security, and the Asia-Pacific military balance. He's the author of the book. Talk about a must-read. This is a must-read. Today, now, more than ever, Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. Now, more than ever, this is the book to read, because he predicted this all was going to happen, and now here we are. There's some GOP lawmakers introducing a resolution to literally hold China accountable for the coronavirus. And will this actually happen? And joining us now to talk about this, General Spaulding. Hey, General, great to have you on, sir.
Great to be back. Thank you.
General, you're one of my favorite guests we have on our show, and I always appreciate your availability. And again, I don't mean to overplug your book, but Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. You can get it at Amazon, your favorite bookstore online. Can't go there. This is now, if our governing people in Congress had read this book when it first came out, we wouldn't be in this situation because they better understand it. Governor Spalding, how responsible is China for what is happening to us now?
Oh, it's 100%
General.
responsible because, so we're endlessly debating whether or not they cooked this virus up in a lab or it, came out of a wet market in Wuhan. It doesn't matter. They hid it. They covered it up. They destroyed evidence in order to prevent knowledge of this human-to-human transmission, and then millions of people left Wuhan to go to the four corners of the earth to spread this thing. And what I'm focused on is what happened next. So they worked with the WHO to concoct this name COVID-19 to hide any evidence of where this thing came from, and then they started spreading propaganda about where it came from. So the first part is deflect blame. Second part, cause panic. They went around buying up supplies everywhere, all over the world. They basically sent out messages to people that were proxies buying up supplies. So now there's no supplies, and then they blocked the export of supplies from their own country. Now they start to come in as the savior after they start coming out of this, because they're the only ones that have the supply chains, and they start to gouge people. So this is deflect blame, cause panic, gain advantage. This is textbook right out of War Without Rules, which is a book that was written by two PLA colonels. They've been executing this strategy for 2 decades, and now we're seeing it in full force.
War Without Rules. So what your position is not only should China be held accountable, we'll talk about that in a minute, but whether it came from a lab or whether it came from a bat that somebody ate raw at a wet market or whatever they eat over there, you're saying it's irrelevant. They hid it. They covered it up. They let people travel. They caused this global pandemic, global meltdown. They hold the supply chains, and now they're trying to sell the supplies needed, which are subpar, plus they're gouging to gain advantage.
It's amazing. And you know what else? If you go back to 2008, the $1 trillion that or more that was part of the Recovery Act, most of that found its way into China building real estate because we flooded the banking system with money. And instead of that money going into our economy to build infrastructure and manufacturing, it went to China to do that. So now we have a $2 trillion recovery, and I'm betting you the same thing is going to happen, and this is what they're counting on, that most of that money finds its way through the banking system into China to build more infrastructure and more manufacturing. That's what they've been doing, and they've been playing this game for a long time.
General Spaulding, how does that money get to China?
So what happens is it finds its way into the banking system, and what happens is the banks turn around, a lot of the major banks in the U.S. turn around and lend that money they did in the past to real estate projects and infrastructure projects. And they're not just in China. They also have infrastructure projects as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So these get lent out, and this is how the money doesn't stay in the United States. It actually goes into the banking system and finds its way into China through these loans and bonds.
It's unbelievable. We're with General Robert Spaulding, author of the book Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. Absolute must-read now more than ever. Brigadier General Spaulding retired from the U.S. Air Force after 25 years of service. He's a former China strategist for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Joint Staff of the Pentagon, as well as a senior defense official and defense attaché to China. He earned his doctorate, PhD in economics and math from the University of Missouri, and he's fluent in Mandarin. So I would say your credentials are pretty sterling, sir. Let's talk about the bipartisan effort underway to hold China accountable. Is there financial accountability? What is the level of accountability, and how is it executed so it's not just something on a piece of paper or an article in the New York Times?
Well, certainly the Chinese Communist Party has assets here in the United States and other Western countries, and those can so they clearly violated international law. There's actually a good article that talked about all the ways that China has violated the international law by keeping secret the spread of this pandemic. And so there should be sanctions. There should be claims brought against their properties around the world. But more importantly, I think, and this is where I think we really need to pay attention, how we prevent that money that going into the banking system from going to China, is we actually use things like the Defense Production Act to force companies to reshore manufacturing. And I'm not talking just for medical gear. I'm talking for microelectronics, for robotics, for semiconductors, all of these things that drive the tech economy. You know, all of these companies are trying to maintain their manufacturing in China. And this is part of this effort to hold them accountable, is really reshoring manufacturing and rebuilding infrastructure. Now, the president has started to talk about some of these things, but I guarantee you what's going to happen is corporate America and Wall Street is going to go to Congress and pressure them to let them figure out where to put the money. And where the money will go is where the Chinese incentivize them to put the money, because they've gamed the system. And this is what we need to understand. They are very good at twisting corporate America and Wall Street around their finger.
Some people, General Spaulding, have suggested that we simply cancel the debt we have to China, because they hold, a couple of $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury bills and Treasury bonds, because they buy up our debt. That's how we fund the government. Everybody knows that. There's been some lawmakers suggesting, the hell with them after this. Just cancel it. Can they do that?
Well, I mean, technically, what happened after World War II, there was a number of bonds that were issued to help China pay for the war in World War II. And we basically never asked for them to pay that back. And that debt exists to this day, and it's been gaining in interest. And so you could make the claim that, okay, we, the UK paid us back. Why don't we make them pay us back as the number 2 economy? I mean, and I think the claims are several $100 billion, if not $1 trillion now. So, I think in between the fact that they allowed this pandemic to spread and the fact that, they haven't been, exactly the best partner, in terms of undermining our economy and our society, we ought to basically say, hey, we're gonna force you to pay back those bonds, and if you don't want to pay them back, great, we'll just cancel our debt to you.
I like that. I mean, look, it's hard to think that Congress is actually going to do something, that any of this will actually happen. But I think there's going to be a growing chorus from grassroots America that we do something. Let's get to our supply chains now. Those of us that have been railing about this for a very long time, like me, remember it was the globalists who were telling us manufacturing doesn't matter, supply chains don't matter, go where the slave labor is, go where you can lower the cost of production, scour the earth for cheap labor. If China can do it, fine, you'll pay less money. It's an open global economy, the free movement of goods and services. Remember that? That's all we heard. It didn't matter. Couldn't get manufacturing back. No one cares, right? Now all of a sudden we care, because it's hit us square upside the head. So the people have been saying this is putting us in trouble forever, like me, are now vindicated. Thank you. So is there, but you look at what China's doing now, as you said when you came on, General. They're selling supplies to the world, gouging them in order to fight the virus that they created. How do we get our supply chain back once and for all and say, you know what, we've had it, we got to bring all this stuff back? How do we do that?
So you actually have to use the authorities that are in the Defense Department, because we put a lot of authority into the Defense Department to protect the industrial base. Mm-hmm. And this was prior to and during World War II and the Cold War, where we used these authorities. We haven't used them, and they just unleashed them on medical supplies. And so as I've been looking at manufacturing in the United States for the last several years, what you find is, although there's money in the system to invest in new manufacturing facilities, it hardly ever goes to the United States, because most banks want to loan to companies that are manufacturing in China. They don't want to loan to companies that want to build manufacturing facilities in the United States. It doesn't happen. And so what the Defense Production Act actually allows the Defense Department to do is say, hey, we want you to manufacture this item in the United States. In other words, you don't have an opportunity to manufacture it in China. You have to manufacture it here. And then when you combine that with tariffs and you combine that with incentives to actually move manufacturing in the United States, you can actually force companies to move the manufacturing. And what they're going to find when they do is that because we have such low energy rates and low corporate tax rates, that they're actually going to be very competitive in terms of their ability to ship those products at a competitive price here in the United States and to the rest of America and back into Europe. So I think we have, based on convention and past practice, just kept flowing money and investment in manufacturing to China, when in reality, if we break that chain, then I think the companies are going to find that America is actually a much more attractive place to do manufacturing.
Well, better skilled labor, better access to raw materials. I mean, we have it all right here. The only thing that's hurt us is, we have to pay a higher wage. And the globalists have told us, again, free movement of people and goods all across the world, slave labor, go where the action is, get the lowest cost of production. So you're going to have to pay more to produce it. But at the end of the day, you control your own destiny. You get a better product. You get U.S. jobs. I mean, the whole thing, what we've done with China has benefited one group other than China General, and that's Goldman Sachs, Lower Manhattan, Wall Street, gangster banksters, the Big Five. It's benefited them. Hasn't benefited anybody else except them, and we keep falling for the same thing over and over and over. It's asinine. Let's get to the military implications of this. Our Department of Defense now getting a little bit stretched because they have to deal with this pandemic. You've got one report that came out that the Iranian regime might be planning some kind of a sneak attack while our eye is off the ball. What do you think of that, sir?
Well, I definitely think it's a very dangerous time for our military. We just had there's an aircraft carrier in Guam that's offloaded 1,000 people because of the coronavirus. In the Pacific today, the Chinese have deployed thousands and thousands of conventional intermediate range ballistic and cruise missiles because we were part of the INF treaty and couldn't match that. Those are far more cost-effective and efficient at putting our bases in the region under threat. And so, we really need to begin to think about how do we restructure our spending. $800 billion for defense when it couldn't protect us from a pandemic, and it's not protecting us right now from the destruction of our economy. And so what the national security strategy says is we need to think about national security differently in this world. Globalization and the internet actually impacts our population directly. It impacts our economy. It impacts our society through social media, and that's what these foreign actors are using. They're not using bombs and bullets. They're using information and money to undermine us. And so we need to think differently, and then we need to restructure how we pay for national security. We don't need to buy a bunch of planes and ships and tanks if that's not what is needed to protect us. Actually, in the Pacific, we probably need a lot more conventional intermediate range ballistic and cruise missiles that are a lot cheaper and actually put the Chinese under threat, and which really deters conflict. So the idea is really to go back to an Eisenhower-type strategy where we're using the military to deter conflict, and then we're using the money we save to invest in our economy and manufacturing and infrastructure and science and technology. And finally, as is in the national security strategy, on page 19, we need to build a secure, encrypted internet for the American people to protect our businesses, to protect our people from having their information used to influence them or steal their intellectual property. This is something we should have done a long time ago. The Chinese did it. They built a great wall to protect their society, and then they stay behind that wall and bombard us with propaganda and media every single day. That's how they're trying to convince everybody that we're the origin of this Wuhan virus. So this is how the war is fought today, and it's really part of the reason I wrote the op-ed that I did recently explaining the war without rules.
And that was written by two PLA, People's Liberation Army, or the Chinese officers, by two PLA Army commanders, right? War Without Rules.
Yeah, they're both People's Liberation Army colonels, and actually the one, Chao Liang, was promoted to general officer, and he teaches at their National Defense University. So a lot of people like to say, oh, this is not really a thing. Well, and if you look at if you read it, and I'll tell you what, read my book, read Stealth War, because I feature it heavily in there, and I try to explain through all of these means and mechanisms the way that they're actually waging that. And the op-ed really goes right to the heart of it, is use chaos and crisis and economics and finance to your advantage and undermine the society of your enemy.
Now, more than ever, read General Spaulding's book, Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. You can get it at Amazon or your favorite bookstore online. Can't go there. They're closed, but you can get it online. General Robert S. Spaulding, retired U.S. Air Force, sir, thank you for being with us. Always an honor to have you on, and thanks for all you do, sir.
Thank you so much.